Before we get started, just a quick reminder. This show is built on opinion, analysis, and perspective from multiple angles. Some of what you hear may challenge your views, push back on the mainstream narrative, or make you uncomfortable, and that's intentional. We're not here to echo headlines. We're here to question them, break them down, and look at what's underneath them. That means you're going to hear different takes, different interpretations, and sometimes conflicting viewpoints all in the same conversation. Take what resonates, question what doesn't, think critically, and as always, do your own research.
Right now, as you're listening to this, there is a clock ticking. Not metaphorically, not politically, literally. There are only a few hours left before a deadline that could determine whether this situation de-escalates quietly or turns into something a whole lot bigger. And the craziest part? Most people are going about their day like it's just another Tuesday. Work, errands, scrolling their phones, completely unaware that decisions being made right now could impact gas prices, markets, and potentially far more than that. And what's wild is, it's not just the situation itself, it's the uncertainty. Nobody really knows what's about to happen. Not the media, not the public, and honestly, it doesn't even feel like the people talking the loudest on TV fully understand where this is headed. You've got strong words, hard deadlines, and zero clarity on what happens if that clock hits zero. So tonight, we're not just asking what's happening. We're asking, what happens if nothing stops it? All right, let's bring in the crew, because if we're counting down to a potential international moment, I want the full spectrum of chaos and clarity in the room. Brian's here, already pacing mentally, probably 5 minutes away from saying this should have been handled months ago and somehow tying it back to leadership failures. Rachel's here, calm, collected, and about to remind all of us that maybe, just maybe, not every situation instantly turns into global disaster, even if it feels like it might. Daniel's here, connecting dots across continents, timelines, and probably 3 things none of us even considered yet. And by the end of it, you're questioning everything you thought you knew. And Skylar's here, ready to challenge everything from a completely different angle, probably asking why the average person is always the one caught in the middle of decisions they had no part in making, and why the human cost always seems to be an afterthought in these conversations. And I'm your host, Artie, watching the clock tick down like the rest of you and wondering why it feels like we're the last ones to be told how serious this might actually be. We are sitting here right now with a real deadline on the table. Not a vague, sometime soon. Not political posturing stretched out over weeks. Hours. A hard line has been drawn, and if nothing changes, we could be looking at a major escalation. And here's what stands out to me. It's not just the deadline. It's how unclear everything around it is. You've got strong statements being made, warnings being thrown around, and at the same time, no real clear picture of what happens next if that deadline passes. No roadmap, no explanation, just, we'll see. Meanwhile, the media is either downplaying it, spinning it, or turning it into another talking point depending on which channel you're watching. One side says it's controlled, the other says it's catastrophic. And the average person? They're stuck trying to figure out what's real and what's noise. So let me ask you this. Are we watching controlled pressure? Or are we sitting on the edge of something that could spiral fast?
This isn't controlled pressure. This is what happens when you let situations drag on too long and then try to slam the brakes at the last second. Deadlines like this don't come out of nowhere. They build over time, and when you finally get to the point where it's hours left, that means something has already gone wrong along the way. And now we're sitting here acting like it's some calculated move, when really it feels like we're reacting under pressure. And let's talk about how this is being handled publicly, because that's the part that should frustrate people the most. You've got mixed messaging everywhere. One minute it's, this is under control. The next minute it's, this could escalate quickly, and nobody's giving a straight answer. That's not leadership, that's damage control. And regular Americans are sitting here wondering how serious this is, while the people in charge act like it's just another press cycle.
And that's where the frustration is really coming from. Because even if this is controlled behind the scenes, even if there is a strategy in place that we're just not fully seeing yet, it doesn't feel controlled to the public. It feels uncertain. It feels incomplete. And when people don't have clarity, they don't just sit there patiently. They start asking questions. They start filling in the gaps. And sometimes, they start assuming the worst. Because uncertainty has a way of doing that. It doesn't just create curiosity, it creates tension. It creates doubt. And when you've got a clock ticking in the background, when you've got strong language being used, deadlines being pushed, and no clear explanation of what happens next, that tension gets amplified. People start wondering if this is just pressure being applied, or if it's something closer to the edge than anyone wants to admit out loud. And what makes it even more complicated is the way this is being presented depending on where you're looking. One side is saying this is controlled, calculated, part of a bigger strategy. Another side is saying this is dangerous, unpredictable, and could escalate quickly. And somewhere in the middle, you've got the average person just trying to figure out what's actually real, and whether this is something they should genuinely be concerned about, or just another moment being blown out of proportion. So Rachel, let me bring you in here, because this is where that line really matters. Is this just the pressure of the moment making things feel bigger than they actually are? Or is this one of those rare situations where the concern people are feeling is actually justified, and we're closer to something serious than anyone is comfortable saying out loud?
I think the concern is understandable, but we have to be careful not to confuse uncertainty with inevitability. Just because there's a deadline doesn't mean escalation is guaranteed. These kinds of high-pressure situations are often designed to force movement, to create urgency where negotiations might otherwise stall. That doesn't mean nothing serious can happen. It just means the presence of pressure doesn't automatically equal collapse. What is concerning, though, is the communication gap. When people don't understand what's happening, they fill in the blanks. And that's where fear, speculation, and overreaction come in. The situation itself may be complex and controlled at higher levels, but the lack of clarity makes it feel chaotic. And perception matters. Because once people start reacting to fear instead of facts, things can escalate in ways that go beyond the original situation.
That right there, perception versus reality, that's the gap we're living in right now. Because whether this is controlled or not, whether there's a plan in place that we just don't fully see yet, it feels unstable. And that feeling matters, because people don't react to what's actually happening behind closed doors. They react to what they can see, what they can hear, and what they can piece together in real time. And right now, what people are seeing is a countdown, strong language, mixed messaging, and no clear picture of what comes next. That creates a kind of tension where even if things are technically under control, it doesn't register that way. It feels like we're standing on something that could shift quickly, even if nobody's willing to say that outright. And when you have that kind of gap between what's happening and what people understand, it opens the door to a lot of questions. Questions about what's being said publicly versus what's actually being discussed behind the scenes. Questions about whether this is as contained as it's being presented, or if there are bigger pieces in play that just haven't been brought into the light yet. So, Daniel, I'm going to let you take this one where you always do, because this feels like one of those moments where there's more going on beneath the surface than what's being said out loud. What are we not seeing here?
What we're not seeing is how many moving pieces are involved at the same time. People are focused on the deadline, but the deadline is just the visible part of a much larger system. There are economic pressures, strategic positioning, alliances, and long-term objectives all intersecting at once. And when those layers overlap, outcomes become harder to predict, not because there's no plan, but because there are multiple plans interacting at the same time. And here's the part most people overlook. Uncertainty can be intentional. When outcomes aren't clearly defined, it gives flexibility. It keeps opponents guessing, but it also keeps the public in the dark. That doesn't automatically mean something catastrophic is about to happen, but it does mean we're not seeing the full scope. And when you don't see the full scope, everything feels more unstable than it might actually be, or more stable than it actually is. And that's the tension we're sitting in right now.
And that's where this conversation shifts a little. Because while we're talking strategy, pressure, and uncertainty at the top level, there's another side to this that doesn't always get enough attention. Skylar, let me bring you in here, because when things like this start building, when deadlines like this start getting real, it's not the people making the decisions who feel it first. It's everyone else.
That's exactly the part that gets overlooked. When we talk about escalation, strategy, and pressure, it all sounds very controlled and calculated. But the reality is, the consequences are rarely contained to the people making those decisions. It's everyday people, both here and abroad, who end up feeling the impact first, whether that's through rising costs, instability, or in worst-case scenarios, something far more serious. And what concerns me is how quickly the human side of this gets pushed aside in favor of political narratives. It becomes about who's right, who's strong, who's in control, and not about what the actual outcome means for real lives. You can call it strategy, you can call it pressure, but at the end of the day, there are always people on the other side of these decisions who don't get a say in any of it. And that's something we should be paying a lot more attention to.
And that's the full picture right there. Strategy, pressure, uncertainty, and the reality of who actually feels the impact when all of this plays out. Because whether this is controlled or not, whether it passes quietly or turns into something bigger, there are layers to this that go far beyond what's being said publicly. You've got decisions being made at levels most people will never see, conversations happening behind closed doors, and outcomes that could shift things quickly. And yet the public is left trying to piece it all together in real time with incomplete information. And that's where the tension really comes from. It's not just the situation, it's the lack of clarity around it. People don't like feeling like they're the last to know, especially when the stakes are this high. You've got strong statements, hard deadlines, and a clock ticking, but no clear sense of what happens next. And when that gap exists between what's happening and what people understand, that's where uncertainty starts to take over. But then you add in what Skylar brought up, and it grounds this in reality. Because while all of this is being discussed in terms of strategy and positioning, the consequences don't stay at that level. They ripple outward. They hit everyday people first, through cost, through stability, through the general feeling of whether things are getting better or worse. And that part doesn't get talked about enough. It's easy to debate the moves being made. It's harder to acknowledge who actually lives with the results of those moves. So what we're left with tonight is this moment, right here, right now, where the outcome isn't fully known, the messaging isn't fully clear, and the pressure is very real. Maybe this resolves quietly, maybe it doesn't. But either way, this is one of those moments where you can feel something building, even if you can't fully see it yet. And sometimes, those are the moments that matter the most. Not because of what's guaranteed to happen, but because of what could.
If you've been rocking with the show, if you've been part of these conversations, if you believe in what we're building here, now's the time to represent it. Head over to the Data and Dissonance merch store, where we've got everything from hoodies and hats to mugs, stickers, and gear that actually means something. This isn't just throwaway merch, it's tied to the message of the show. Speaking truth, stirring thought, pushing back on the noise and thinking for yourself. And let's talk about the coffee, because that's become a staple of this brand. You've got the High Lakes Light Roast with those smooth citrus and chocolate notes, the Rock Creek Medium Roast bringing that balanced, everyday flavor with a little edge, and the Bitterroot Dark French Roast if you like it bold, strong, and unapologetic. Kind of like this show. Whether you're starting your morning or listening on the drive home, that coffee hits different when it's tied to something you actually believe in.
Every purchase helps support the show, helps us keep this going, helps us stay independent, and helps us keep bringing you real conversations without filters. So if you want to support what we're building here and wear it, drink it, and represent it, check out the merch store today. There's something about moments like this that hit differently. Not because we know exactly what's going to happen, but because we don't. That uncertainty, that feeling of something hanging in the balance, it forces people to pay attention in a way they normally wouldn't. And maybe that's why this moment matters more than people realize. Because it's not just about this deadline, it's about what it represents. It represents how quickly things can shift. One decision, one move, one outcome, and suddenly the conversation changes. Not just politically, not just globally, but personally. People start feeling it in their daily lives, whether it's through the economy, stability, or just the general sense of where things are headed. And that's the part that doesn't always get talked about, the downstream impact. But it also exposes something else, the gap between what's happening and what people are being told. Because right now there's a disconnect. You've got tension, you've got pressure, you've got real stakes, and at the same time, you've got mixed messaging, uncertainty, and a lack of clarity. And when those two things exist at the same time, people start questioning everything. And honestly, maybe they should. So wherever this goes, whether it passes quietly or turns into something bigger, this moment is a reminder. Pay attention, stay aware, think for yourself. Because the world doesn't always give you clear answers in real time. Sometimes all you get is the moment, and what you choose to do with it. Remember to speak truth, stir thought.
This episode is brought to you by the Caleb Rourke Thriller series, a story rooted in power, deception, and the kind of global tension that doesn't feel too far off from the conversations we're having right here on this show. If you're into high-stakes narratives, government secrets, and a world where one decision can change everything, check out The Covenant Protocol, The Prophet Directive, and Black Echo Rising, available now on Amazon. It's not just a series, it's an extension of the same ideas we break down here: control, uncertainty, and what really happens behind the scenes. And the creative world behind Data and Dissonance doesn't stop with books. The show is also backed by original music that carries the same energy, the same message, and the same raw honesty. If you're into gritty, real, emotionally driven sound, check out the albums Uncaged, a darker, more grunge-inspired project shaped by struggle, pain, and resilience, and Four Wheelers and Hallelujah, which brings a more grounded, country-driven sound focused on faith, freedom, and the people who keep this country moving forward every day. Both albums are available now on Spotify and all major streaming platforms. So whether you're reading, listening, or tuning in right here, everything you see under the Data and Dissonance name is connected. It's all part of the same message: